Hello and welcome to another edition of another book review. This week I'll be reviewing Lionel Shriver's novel, The Mandibles. I'll talk very briefly about the author, go into a spoiler-free overview of the plot, talk about what I liked about the book, what I didn't like about the book, who I'd recommend the book to, finish off with what I'll be reading for next time. I listened to this book on audiobook, so unfortunately I don't have a cover to share with you this week. Lionel Shriver is an American author. She got her MFA from, I believe, Columbia. She's probably still best known for her book that I think was made into a movie, We Need to Talk About Kevin, which came out in the mid-2000s. This book, The Mandibles, came out in 2016, and it's a little bit of a difficult book to describe, so I'll give you kind of the basic premise of it. And I'm going to avoid spoilers, obviously, but the book is set in the future, and it's about a very large, multi-generational family called the Mandibles. They are... there's a couple different branches of them, but they are not quite independently wealthy, but they have generational wealth until in the world of this book, it's set in the year 2029 primarily. It does cover about 20 years in the chronology of the book. It starts off in 2029, and the US dollar ceases to be the reserve currency of the world, which causes the U.S. economy to collapse. And in doing so, the book is really, more than anything else, following these characters who are all part of this family as they kind of go through this economic collapse and what it does to them as a family and what it's doing to kind of the outside world around them. And that's really the book. There's other things that are going on, but that's the book. There's really not a, how do I say this? There's not really a hook to these characters specifically. You do definitely get the feeling that you're basically just trying to watch these characters survive. And what I liked about the book is I felt it was a very realistic depiction of this Shriver, kind of this idea of the economy collapsing, a modern American economy collapsing across the entire country at once. Basically a Great Depression. And I think Shriver does a really good job of thinking through the different permutations of what would happen in this scenario. I think she does a really good job of bringing up not just things from a class perspective, but also from a race perspective, and showing how these different characters change over time. I think is really, really good. I think that she does a good job of explaining, giving you enough to explain what's going on. I was able to follow it. I felt pretty well. It is pretty information. There's a couple of info dump sections of the book, but I found myself getting through those relatively well. I do have a little bit of a background in this, so it may be a little bit of a barrier for some people, but I was able to get through that and know enough of the book and not focus on it as much as the book went on as far as the ins and outs and whys and wherefores of all this stuff, of why it's happening, and just watch the impact on the characters. So I think she does a good job of kind of getting you over the hump and just like putting you in this world. I think the characters are drawn very realistically for the most part. There are some characters who I thought were a little bit more annoying than others, and I think that the book has pacing issues, which I'll get to in a second. But I think as she also does, for as bleak as this book is, there's little dollops of humor kind of strewn throughout the book that make it a little bit more tolerable. If you're someone who has a really hard time with bleak books, you still may want to avoid this one, but I think she does give you enough nuggets of humor to kind of get you through it. I felt like this book reminded me a lot of another book, and I'll kind of talk more about that in a second of which book it is. But like that book, the book hits a certain point and the narrative shifts a little bit, and it kind of almost feels like two halves of a book, even though page count, I think it's about 60-40 or 75-25 as far as when that split occurs in the book. And I found myself enjoying the first half of that a lot more than the second half. The reason is I think the spotlight shifts on different characters, and because this is such a large ensemble for the cast, there are some characters who I think are getting given short shrift a little bit, and there are one or two characters who I felt were a little thin and maybe a little bit unrealistic given their ages, but given kind of the impact of what's going on in the world around them, I kind of let that go. But it was something in the back of my mind as far as, would this character really have this knowledge, and would this character be able to do this at such a young age? So I thought that in a couple points of the book. But the other thing, the lack of a plot or lack of an overarching plot for these characters, because it's really more of their kind of day-to-day life during this collapse, bothered me a little bit. I was able to listen to this on audiobook, like I've said before, and so I did feel myself at times wanting to kind of step away from it. I powered through it, and I'm glad that I did, but I did definitely feel the lack of a kind of an overarching mystery or question about some of these characters. There is a little teeny tiny bit of one, but I don't think it's the reason someone would keep listening to this book, because it only packs really one character, and it's a very minor thing. So I think the book would have maybe been better served if there was more of a hook throughout the entire book, or a mystery. The issue I had with the recording of it, this is such a large cast of characters. I think it would have been beneficial if there was an ensemble recording. They had one gentleman be the narrator for the audiobook, and I feel that it would have been better served with more people. I'll just put it that way. So, because the voices of the characters are nearly indistinguishable, and I felt that suffered my enjoyment of it, because it was like, well, which of these characters is talking? Is this sister? Is this other sister? So I found there's a little bit of confusion of which character was in the scene at times, because the narrator didn't really have multiple voices. There's also, the dialogue was a little bit stiff at times in his delivery, and it could have been the dialogue was stiff as it was written, but his delivery didn't really serve it very well. I also felt that I would recommend someone to read this on a paper book or an ebook, just because one of the other things that bothered me when reading it is the book, the subtitle of the book is The Mandibles 2029 to, I believe, 2047. So it tells you how much time is covered on the cover of the book. But in the individual scenes, it's not quite clear to me. There were times when I was listening to it, there wasn't quite clear how much time had passed in the book. And I think if I had been reading this, I would have been able to go back and try to catch more hints of, well, has this been 2 years? Has this been 3 years? Has this been a year? Has this been a month? So the passage of time was not handled very deftly in the audiobook that I read, which hurt the enjoyment of it a little bit. So who would I recommend this book to? If you're someone who likes family dramas with a twist, or like speculative science fiction but still wants kind of a realistic background with realistic characters, someone who's into disaster movies or all of those things at once, you'll probably enjoy this. I felt that, I think that the book does a good job with the family relationship of giving you enough characters who change over time to keep it interesting. I do think there was a little bit of a spotlight shift that I didn't care for as much. And some of the more interesting characters kind of get left on the sidelines a little bit more than I would have liked in the second half, but it was still enough. And to me, the biggest thing I'd recommend is, I feel that Lionel Shriver did a really good job of thinking through the permutations. And really, ultimately, the book is about a couple things, but one of the things that the book is kind of clearly about is about generations of people and having trauma, the impact of trauma on a generation, specifically the economic trauma leveled on a generation and what that does to them over time. And I think she's really good at showing the different permutations of what that would look like, how that would change society, how that would change the different relationship of people of different races in terms of immigration, in terms of attitudes towards people of different races, people of different ages, what it would mean in terms of government spending. She clearly thought through all these things in a very detailed manner, and I think it makes the book feel really full and whole, makes it feel like a real, almost history report of what happens. I personally really like that. I could see some people bouncing off this really hard if you're not someone who wants the ins and outs of a setup in terms of the realism and what exactly the different economists believe on a certain issue of what would happen, what would not happen. If you're someone who really strives away from that, I think there's enough of it to get you through. For me, it was. and maybe some people it was too much. I don't really know. But I enjoyed all those things. It reminded me, the book that I would recommend it if you like this book, if you read Tom Peretta's The Leftovers, this is a very similar book in the sense that the book is, yes, it's about this family, but it's also about the impact of this on society, and it's kind of a blending of those two. And so if you like Tom Peretta's The Leftovers, I imagine you would also like this. I actually liked this book a little bit more than that one. I felt like I cared more about these characters to some degree, and I felt like that somehow this book was able to keep my attention a little bit for a little bit longer. I felt like the Tom Peretta, I liked the setup a lot. I got about halfway through, and the more I read it, the more I felt it kind of went off the rails. And I think this is pretty, because it is, what I felt like to me was relatively realistic, or she convinced me it was realistic, I should say. I kept finding myself kind of going back to it. I do wish it had stuck to a little bit of a broader scope, including more characters as the book went on. The narrowing bothered me a little bit. I think that there's a little bit of a deus ex machina at one point in the book that may bother some people. It may not, but those were my feelings on it. Overall, I was pleasantly surprised about how much I liked the book. If you're someone who is into speculative fiction that's a little bit on the bleaker side, like The Leftovers, then I would definitely recommend this one. And that is The Mandibles by Lionel Shriver. Next time I'm going to be reading something that's more in the here and now. It's going to be Evicted. Until next time, please feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll leave my link to my Twitter handle below. Until next time, bye.